They laughed, not all of them at the same time. That would have been too obvious. They did it in layers, the way rain comes before a storm. First the silence that was slightly too long when you told them what you wanted to do. Then the small smile that died just before it became real laughter. Then the advice. Always the advice. Have you thought about something more stable? That's very ambitious. I'm just saying, most people who try that don't make it. And every single one of those people, every last one of them, believe they were helping you. That's the part I find most interesting. Not the doubt. The sincerity of the doubt. The sincerity of the doubt. They weren't lying to you when they told you it was unrealistic. They genuinely believed it. And that makes it worse, not better. Because you can't even be cleanly angry at a lie. You have to metabolize the specific insult to people who love you and have known you your whole life, looking at what you wanted to become, and deciding with total confidence that it was too much. And here's what happened. Tell me if this is familiar. You didn't argue. You smiled. You said something reasonable, and then you went home and quietly, methodically began to make the dream smaller, not all at once. Piece by piece. The way you take apart something broken rather than the way you build something. Carefully, with focused attention to which part to remove next. Until the original version was replaced by something more defensible. Something you could explain without seeing the smile? Here's the thing about the smile. It didn't kill the dream. It fed something else. And that something else has been growing. In the dark, in the silence, has been growing. In the dark, in the silence, in all the hours you spent building the defensible version and feeling slightly sick about it. That something else has a name, and we're about to meet it. Let me describe exactly how it happened. Because the mechanics matter, and most people are too busy being hurt to examine the mechanism. It started early. Probably earlier than you remember clearly. There was a moment. You were younger. The specific age doesn't matter. When you expressed something you wanted, something that was genuinely, urgently yours, and the room received it wrong. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they were quiet in a specific way that means they thought you were being cute, or deluded, or both. Maybe someone said it gently. The way adults say things to children they don't want to discourage, but definitely want to redirect. The message arrived clearly. The size of what you want is not appropriate for who you are. And you were young enough that the message installed. What the installation does is subtle. It doesn't kill the wanting. Nothing kills the wanting. That's the fascinating part. The part that I find myself returning to every time I examine how this works. The wanting persists. It just gets revised into something that requires permission. Instead of, this is what I'm going to do, becomes, if it's okay with you, this is what I'd like to try. Instead of moving, it waits. It waits for the signal that it's been approved. And the signal never comes from the people who installed the requirement. Because the people who installed the requirement don't have that signal to give. They never had it. They were working from their own installed version. Here's something about doubt from the people closest to you. It wears an unusual disguise. Doubt from strangers is easy to dismiss. Who are they to tell you what's possible? But doubt from family, from the people who watched you grow up, from the colleagues who see you every day, that doubt comes dressed as information, as insider knowledge, as the conclusion of people who know you well enough to be honest with you when others won't be. It is not information. It is their ceiling imposed on your architecture. I know someone, very well-regarded man, very sure of his own judgment, who once told a person that the size of what they were attempting was beyond their particular abilities. He said it kindly. He said it with genuine concern. He believed every word. And the thing I found most interesting about that exchange was not his certainty. It was that he had never, not once in his life, attempted anything of that size himself. His assessment of the other person's capacity was built entirely on the foundation of his own untested one. I thought that was a rather elegant illustration of how these things work. The internal monologue of someone who has been laughed at sounds like this. You think, if the people who know me best don't believe in this, maybe they're seeing something I can't see. You think, maybe the confidence I feel is just ignorance. I don't know enough to know what I don't know. You think, I could try and fail and give them the satisfaction of being right. That last one is the most paralyzing. Not the failure. The confirmation. The specific catastrophic fear of becoming someone's told you so. And so you do something very precise and very expensive. You make yourself smaller than the dream in advance. Before anyone can prove you wrong, you pre-shrink the target. You set a modest goal so that when you achieve it, which you will, because you're more capable than anyone in that room has admitted, it's small enough that it doesn't require defending. It's small enough that it doesn't require defending. Small enough that the smile can't reach it. You've been doing this for years. You've been achieving at the level of what's defensible rather than the level of what's possible. And the gap between those two things is not failure. It is the cost of the laugh. There's also a specific cost nobody talks about. What? Ish is the anger. Not clean anger. Not the productive kind that clarifies. The specific, low-grade, ambient anger of someone who has been managing other people's comfort at the expense of their own progress. Who has been polite and reasonable and not that difficult, while the thing they actually are keeps pressing against the inside of the polite. Reasonable, not that difficult surface. You felt it. The specific tension of being too large for the container and choosing the container anyway. So here's the actual question, not the comfortable one. If you already knew, at the moment they laughed, that they were wrong, what exactly have you been waiting for? Unrealistic. That's the word that did the work. That's the word that got installed in the machine and has been running ever since. Every time you considered the larger version of the thing you wanted, that word showed up, sometimes in someone else's voice, eventually in your own, and the larger version got smaller. Let me tell you what unrealistic actually means when it's used this way. It doesn't mean statistically improbable. If it meant that, it would come with data. It would say, here is the base rate for this outcome. Here are the factors that correlate with success versus failure. Here is how your specific profile maps onto the distribution. Nobody ever says it that way. Nobody ever brings the data. Unrealistic is delivered without evidence, without analysis, without a single specific fact about the actual difficulty of the thing you want to do. What it means is, this exceeds the size of what I have decided is appropriate for you. And I'm going to call my decision a fact about reality rather than a fact about my imagination. Unrealistic is always a limit on the person saying it, presented as a limit on the person hearing it. The word has never once accurately described the external world. It has only ever described the internal ceiling of the person delivering it. The dream was never unrealistic. It was just too large for smaller people to see clearly. The laugh has a history. It isn't random, and it isn't personal, which makes it simultaneously less offensive and more insidious. Every social system you have ever been a part of, family, school, workplace, culture, was organized around a hierarchy of appropriate aspiration. The hierarchy defines who gets to want big things and who is being unrealistic for wanting them. The hierarchy is not explicit. It's not written down anywhere. It operates through exactly the mechanisms you've experienced. the silence, the smile, the concerned advice. And it is maintained, mostly unconsciously, by everyone who accepted their own place in it. Because every person who accepted their place in the hierarchy has an interest in the hierarchy remaining accurate. When they laughed at your dream, they were not laughing at the dream. They were maintaining the hierarchy. They were performing the social function of confirming that the arrangement in which certain people want certain things and other people want smaller things remains intact. And they performed that function automatically, without instruction, because they had the hierarchy fully installed themselves. This is not a conspiracy. It is more boring than a conspiracy. It is just how social systems preserve themselves by producing the discomfort necessary to redirect anyone who gets large enough to disrupt them. You were never the problem. You were a disruption to an arrangement that needed you smaller. Here is the question nobody asks about the people who laughed. What are they built? Not what have they built. That's a different, easier question. What are they actively, presently, currently constructing? What are they attempting that is uncomfortable, that makes the am vulnerable, that requires them to be seen failing if it doesn't work? What dream of their own are they defending against? The specific smile of someone who found it too large? Almost always nothing. The people most enthusiastic about the impossibility of your ambitions are almost exclusively people who are not attempting anything. Not because they're malicious. I want to be careful about this because clean resentment would actually be useful here. And what I'm describing is something more complicated. They're not attempting anything because they accepted the hierarchy's assignment of their appropriate size a long time ago, and the acceptance was painful, and the scar has calcified into certainty. They are not wrong because they're stupid. They are wrong because their ceiling became their floor. And now you walking around with the refusal to accept the assignment, still carrying the dream, still growing toward the size of the thing that got laughed at. You make the calcified certainty visible. You become, simply by existing at the size you're actually at, a question they don't want to answer. I'll tell you something about people who laugh at big dreams. There's a particular variety that fascinates me. People who tried something significant once, got hurt, and made the very understandable mistake of concluding that the injury was evidence about the world rather than about the specific attempt at the specific time. I knew someone like that, very perceptive man, very good at reading people, who had been turned away from something he wanted enormously early in his life, and had responded by becoming an expert on why wanting things was dangerous. He was brilliant at it. He helped a lot of people maintain their assigned sizes. He called it wisdom. I called it a wound that found employment. The laughter was never about your dream. It was about theirs. Here is why. T being laughed at actually does to a person who doesn't quit. It removes the luxury of casual commitment. You know what motivates people who are pursuing things in friendly conditions, with everyone's approval, with the social validation of the people around them, with the comfortable assurance that their environment thinks they're on the right track. Approximately the same amount as the environment's approval is worth, which is until something better comes along. Approval-fueled commitment is contingent. It depends on the continuing supply of the approval. When the approval dries up, when the environment changes, when the cheerleaders get tired, when the hard parts arrive, the motivation tends to leave with it. The person who has been laughed at has had the approval removed at the beginning. It was never there. What they have instead is something considerably more durable, the specific, private, immune motivation of someone who has already been told no by the people whose opinion they thought they needed and continued anyway. That continuation in the absence of approval from a position of active disbelief from the people who know them best That is the hardest thing a motivated person ever does. And it builds a quality of commitment that approval seekers never develop. They don't need it. You do. And so you have it. The laugh was the best thing that happened to your commitment. You just had to survive it first. There are two versions of someone who has been laughed at and has kept going. The first version is running toward the laugh. Everything they do is organized around the moment the doubters have to admit they were wrong. Every achievement is secretly addressed to the specific people who smiled. The evidence of their success is a constant interior monologue. Are they watching? Do they know now? Has the verdict been revised? This person achieves things. But the achievement is always in conversation with the room that laughed. They are still essentially in that room. The dream is still defined by the terms the laughers set. It is the refutation of their conclusion, which means their conclusion is still setting the terms. The second version is running toward the thing. At some specific point, it happens differently for different people, but it happens. The laugh stops being the fuel and starts being irrelevant. The vision of the doubters watching stops being motivating and starts being noise. The achievement is no longer a response to their assessment. It is simply the natural consequence of continuing to move towards something because it is genuinely, structurally, irrevocably yours. The monster that woke up in the dark is not running toward the laugh. It stopped caring about the laugh sometime in the second year, when the work got harder than the approval would have sustained anyway. It is moving toward the thing with the specific, terrible focus of something that has been underground for a long time and has a clear idea of where the surface is. Fuel the monster with clarity, not with revenge. Clarity lasts. Revenge runs out. The internal vocabulary of someone still operating under the laugh is very precise, and it has been producing the wrong outputs for years. You hear it every time the larger version of the dream surfaces. Who am I to think I can do this? What makes me different from everyone else who tried and failed? Maybe they saw something I'm too close to see. These questions sound like humility. They are the architecture of the laugh, installed inside you and running as internal commentary. Replace them. Who am I to think I can do this? Becomes, who decided I can't, and what have they built? What makes me different? Becomes, what do I know from direct experience of doing this that the people who laugh don't have access to? Maybe they saw something. Becomes, they saw what their own ceiling looked like. That's not the same as information about mine. I don't want to prove them right. Becomes their being wrong is not my business. What I'm building is my business. The shift is from a frame where their opinion is the relevant variable to a frame where it simply isn't. Not because you've decided to ignore it, because you've accurately assessed its content and found it to be information about them, not about you. Some of the environments you currently occupy were designed to maintain the assigned size. The family dinner where your ambitions are treated as an ongoing topic of gentle concern. The workplace where the culture of appropriate aspiration is enforced through the implicit social contract of not being too much. A friend group where big moves are discussed with the specific caution of people whose biggest move was deciding not to move. The social media consumption calibrated to confirm that the people doing what you want to do are special in some way that you aren't. These environments are not neutral. They are actively producing the signal, this is the appropriate size. The audit is not about eliminating these relationships. It is about accurate accounting. How much of your available thinking time is spent inside environments that produce the reducing signal? And how much is spent inside environments, physical, virtual, or internal, where the operating assumption is that the thing you want to do is simply a problem to be solved, rather than a presumption to be corrected? Find the builders, the people who are attempting things, who speak about what they're building rather than what they're protecting, who find your ambition interesting rather than threatening. You don't need their approval either. You need their frequency, the ambient frequent. Sigh of course you're building something. What are those specific problems? Is different from the ambient frequency of that's very ambitious, and it produces different outputs. Change the ratio of the frequencies you're operating in. The next time someone delivers the laugh, in whatever form it takes in this decade of your life, however refined the delivery has become, you need 2 internal sentences before you respond. Not for them, for the architecture of your own reaction. The first, this is information about their ceiling, not about mine. The second, the monster does not require their permission to move. Not aggressive, not defensive, not even particularly interested. The tone of someone who has heard this frequency before, identified its source, and found it neither surprising nor relevant to the current direction of travel. The certainty is not performed. It is the specific quiet certainty of someone who has already decided and finds the attempt to undecide them mildly interesting. You don't argue with a weather forecast when you're underground. You simply know where you are and proceed. There is a moment. It happens to everyone who keeps going despite the laugh. When the thing stops being about proving them wrong, it starts being simply about the thing. That moment is not a feeling. It is a structural change. A motivation is no longer contingent on the external audience. The work has become its own justification, its own fuel, its own evidence. The ownership statement is a declaration, internal, private, unreported, that you have arrived at that moment. That the drain is no longer defined by the terms of the people who laughed. That the size of what you're attempting is no longer calibrated to what's defensible in a room full of people who never tried. The ownership statement sounds like this. I am building the thing, not the defensible versi on the thing. And I am done adjusting its size for the comfort of people who have not built anything. Not angry. The anger is expensive, and the monster has better things to do with the energy. Just certain. The quiet, immovable certainty of someone who has made the specific decision that the laughter was the last thing the dream ever had to survive. From those particular people, the monster doesn't wake up angry. It wakes up clear. Here is the system underneath everything I've described. Every social structure has a mechanism for maintaining its shape, for keeping people at their assigned sizes and their assigned lanes, producing the predictable outputs that the structure was built to receive. The mechanism is not enforced by authority. Authority is too expensive and too visible. The mechanism is enforced by something quieter and more efficient. The social cost of aspiring beyond the assigned size. A slight withdrawal of warmth. The concerned advice. The silence before the answer. The smile. This mechanism works extraordinarily well on people who still need the approval of the room to proceed. And it is entirely ineffective on people who have passed through the specific transformation that happens when the laugh has been survived enough times, and they have continued anyway. The transformation is not resilience in the generic sense. It is something more precise. The point at which the social cost of aspiring beyond the assigned size becomes smaller than the internal cost of not doing so. When it costs you more in the specific private currency of self-respect and forward motion to stay at the defensible size than to move toward the real one. That is the moment the monster wakes up, not in fury, in clarity. And here's what is actually true about you right now at this specific moment. You have survived the laugh. Not once, many times you have heard the asses. Cement from the people whose assessment you thought mattered most, and you have continued. Perhaps more quietly, perhaps more carefully, perhaps more carefully, perhaps more underground than you would have chosen. But you have continued. The dream is still there. Not the defensible version, the actual one. You know it's still there because the gap between the defensible version and the actual one is exactly the shape of the discomfort you've been carrying. That discomfort is not evidence that the dream was wrong. It is evidence that you are still the size the dream requires, even after years of pressure to be smaller. The people who laughed are not the story. They were never the story. They were the pressure that revealed whether the thing was real or not. And the thing is real. You proved it by staying real alongside it, in the underground years, in the quiet, in the hours when no one was watching. And you were still moving toward it. The monster that woke up is not defined by what was said in that room. It is defined by everything that has been built since the room. Every quiet decision to keep going. Every morning when the defensible version was set aside and the actual version was worked on. Every moment when the size of the dream was maintained in private, regardless of what was presented in public. A laugh only matters in the room where it happened. You are no longer in that room.